The People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. Now, the social contract theory suggests that citizens surrender certain freedoms and rights to the government in exchange for protection and the provision of essential services. Corruption and maladministration are often seen as breaches of this social contract, eroding public trust and confidence in the government. Further, they perpetuate inequality and hinder socio-economic development. How do these issues impact the overall well-being and quality of life for ordinary citizens? Let's have the conversations. I'm so pleased to welcome to the studio my guest tonight, Dr. Sakuntala, Kadirgamar, Executive Director, Law and Society Trust, which is one of the pioneer human rights and advocacy organizations established in 1982. Good evening and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sonali, for inviting me.
Dr. Kadirgamar, in the context of Sri Lanka, how do you define the social contract between our government and its citizens, and how has corruption and maladministration undermined trust in government institutions?
Well, Sonali, we have to be sure whether we really have a clear social contract, because it's 75 years since we received independence from the British, and we have to look at the directions that our country has gone. I think people had different expectations when we got independence, that we would be a multi-ethnic plural society, and there would be we'd be striving for equality and non-discrimination and really advancement of the people. We started on a very good platform, compared to India and Pakistan, which are born out of deep struggle and very low literacy rates, the financial issues, and of course partition. Sri Lanka had such a peaceful transition at independence. One really thought that we would be on an upward trajectory. But it seemed that our political leadership had different ideas as to what the shape of Sri Lanka would be. So there have been many shocks in our system over the years, over the last 75 years, where the social contract has been redefined. I think it has become a far more majoritarian approach to government, so minorities felt increasingly marginalized and sidelined. Laws to suppress rights and freedoms were passed. So you found that it was being redefined to being a very majoritarian concept of government. But I think even the majority is severely disappointed by what has transpired, because certainly economic development, the ideas that we would be a more egalitarian society and that we would really look at the bringing up the giving equal opportunities to people, especially rural the youth, had different expectations with good education and health care. But again, there was a mismatch. Government wasn't able to lead. They provide services, but no opportunities. And I think that is the role of government as well. So our history of conflict, communal violence, insurrections, ultimately a war, really shows this tussle between citizen and state. But again, after the war was over, there was an expectation that, now there would be a peacetime government, and we would look back at all the things, the errors that we'd made, and there would be a new form of looking at the way society should be restructured, and that didn't happen. It was increasingly majoritarian, increasingly arbitrary, and I think the inequalities between the citizens and the power holders has increased in the last few years. Many would actually attribute this to the beginning of the neoliberal economy introduced in the 1970s, the late 70s, 77, when we started dismantling the welfare state because we felt we could not afford it. But I think even if you don't have a very 100% welfare state, you have to have the lowest common denominator of social protection for people, and I think that has been falling. But also, we can't afford these welfare benefits because we haven't got a proper tax base and redistribution, and also an efficient administration. So I think people feel let down politically, economically, and socially, and we are where we are in this state of economic collapse as well. But I think what is really upsetting people now is when they see the manifest inequalities and arbitrary government, the failure of institutions to protect them. I think this is what has been the thin end of the wedge, and I think that was manifested in the Aragalaya.
Now, we have plenty of laws and regulatory frameworks. So, addressing corruption and maladministration requires systemic reforms and accountability measures. What strategies or reforms do you think are necessary over and above the strategies and reforms that are taking place right now to restore public trust in government institutions?
Yeah, well, I think we did some changes. I think in 2015. No, I would go back further. We did have a system where there was a far more independent public administration, a more professionally based public administration. That was dismantled in the 70s. The public service, was then brought under political control. So the moment you do that and people depend on ministers for their jobs and all that, you cease to have independent people. So that was the first death knell of the public service. Likewise, the judiciary too has been subjected to these controls. The judiciary had to have independence, security of tenure, the rational form of promotions, etc. And all that over time was being eroded. What was worse is, again, from the 70s, you had government actually thumbing their noses at the judiciary, because the judiciary would come out with certain judgments, especially on fundamental rights. And there was a time when this was under the government of Mr. J.R. Jayawardena, where if a police officer was found guilty of abusing human rights, the court judgment stood, but he was promoted and his fine was paid by the government. So what is the indication to the judiciary? So I think these are things that have systematically corroded those institutions, sapped their morale as well. Now, in 2015, we brought in some changes, an independent constitutional council to ensure appointments were more transparent and less partisan, and we have bribery commissions and right to information, and all those commissions have been set up. But again, they have to be human rights commission, but they have to be staffed, adequately funded, and their rulings respected. So there has to be a culture that supports them, not setting up an institution alone. And I think successive governments have not shown that willingness. They feel it's a sign of weakness to say, okay, I was wrong, we'll step back on this. I think it's a sign of maturity. The government can say, yes, okay, people don't want this, we've made a mistake, let's go back to the drawing board.
Right. So my question to you is, what kind of reforms and systems must we now implement?
I think when the Aragalaya, coming back to that, I think many in government don't want to hear that word, but it's going to be haunting us for a while. They keep referring to a system change. Not only a system change, they wanted a people change too. They wanted the political stakeholders of the day out, and that can only happen with an election. But even with an election, I don't think, with the present system, that won't happen, because our parties, the political parties that have the money and the infrastructure, they are controlled by small cabals, and they choose who comes up. We all pay lip service to having young people and women in politics, but we don't have that inclusive process. So the power holders have not recognized that. And if they don't recognize it, then the change won't come through a politically mandated process. It will come through street battles, because people don't feel that they have an ability to change the system from within a constitutional framework. So I think that's very important that the power holders recognize that, because there is a restive, angry, youthful population that is kind of tired of this. And they might be able to control it for a little while, like they've done in Thailand and they've done in Pakistan, etc. But there's only a certain extent to which you can keep thwarting the popular will.
What is the message to policymakers, especially now that we're going in for a year of elections? What do you think the politicians need to pay heed to?
Yeah, I think they are caught in their own trap also to some extent, because the big major political parties kind of know that many of their preferred candidates are now tainted and unpopular with the electorate. So they are also stuck with finding the right faces, I think, and they don't want to recognize that. But unless they bring in new people, they commit to a different political agenda, it is going to be very difficult. Now we have an additional problem. We are bankrupt. I mean, we are going through this process of negotiating structural adjustment with the International Monetary Fund. I think they will also want to know that, you know, whichever government comes into place will accept some of these terms, which and many people will not. So I see a period of turmoil and restiveness when people refuse to accept both the structural adjustment programs, the kind of policies that have been put forward by the government. So there is going to be a period of uncertainty. The question is whether we're going to have hung parliaments, which will make it more difficult to govern, or maybe there will be some surprises which will shock the power holders, but that might also happen.
Speak to us also about the importance and the power of the citizenry being aware and equipped, aware of their rights and their responsibilities.
I think citizens have a lot of sense of entitlement also, and many have not really thought through how they exercise their rights. I mean, I know myself that people often say we vote because, you know, our parents voted this way, or our community is voting this way, and they're less critical. If he's our guy, we won't ask too many questions, even when we know that he's doing something that is wrong, and we don't want to let go of our guy. But I think now they're kind of recognizing that this has really led to corruption, and especially after COVID and, you know, all these corruption scandals, you realize how unresponsive the political leadership is to the needs of citizens. And I think out of that disenchantment, there will be a greater sense of awareness, but also responsibility. I mean, that is something we are not having a public conversation about that. And I think these civic dialogues are really important, because if you're going through a period of hardship, and we will have to do that, we will have to have a period of austerity, we need to know what austerity is going to look like and whether everybody is going to experience austerity. Right now, it seems as if, you know, if you are cushioned financially, you really don't experience it in the same way. You might give up some of your frills and perks, but it doesn't affect you as deeply as it does to the middle classes, the poor people. So I think that confidence is not also there, and there is resentment that, you know, they are suffering in a different way. And there is absolutely no communication between the meaningful communication between the government and the citizens, not even in Parliament. I mean, you can see how Parliament has been sidelined so much. So which institutions do people believe in? The government has made it very clear they don't want to see people on the streets. They don't want to hear their protests on the streets. They tear gas them. But how do they respond to elected representatives in Parliament? Very badly. I mean, this recent debacle where, you know, such key figures have walked out of the Parliamentary Select Committee, COPE, you know, is an indication that even those institutions of accountability are failing us.
Yeah. We're in conversation with Dr. Sakuntala Kadirgamar. We're going for a break. We'll be right back.
The People's Platform.
The Symphony Orchestra of Sri Lanka proudly presents SOSL Concert, a musical masterpiece conducted by Kiko Kobayashi with the world premiere of Lalnath De Silva's first cello concert with soloist Dushanti Pereira, Supe's Light Calvary Overture and Brahms' First Symphony. 23rd of March, 7 p.m. onwards at the Lionel Wendt Theatre. Tickets available now. Electronic media sponsors: Yes 101, Legends 966, Newsfirst and TV1.
Lanka's precious world heritage.
The Symphony Orchestra of Sri Lanka proudly presents SOSL Concert, a musical masterpiece conducted by Kiko Kobayashi with the world premiere of Lalnath De Silva's first cello concert with soloist Dushanti Pereira, One Supé's Light Calvary Overture and Brahms' First Symphony. 23rd of March, 7 p.m. onwards at the Lionel Wendt Theatre. Tickets available now. Electronic media sponsors: Yes 101, Legends 966, Newsfirst and TV1.
TV1. TV for life.
No confidence motion against the Speaker, defeated in Parliament. Speaker says a conspiracy was in play in the proposal made for him to take control of the country during the Aragalaya. IMF and Sri Lanka reached staff-level agreement for second review. IMF urges need to restructure external debt soon. President says debt restructuring is anticipated to conclude by June and July. Presidential election and then general election. Verite Research claims 90% say the economic conditions in the country were getting worse. 4 people, including Duminda Nagamua, who were arrested in Fort, remanded, while 24 others granted bail.
TV1. TV for life. The People's Platform.
Welcome back. I'm in conversation with Dr. Sakuntala Kadirgamar, Executive Director of the Law and Society Trust. Dr. Kadirgamar, Sri Lanka's overemphasis on mega development projects over investing in its citizens. What's the point of having all these fancy projects when we have a disempowered, unhappy citizenry? So my question to you is, how should this balance be drawn?
For some misguided reason, our politicians seem to think that the height of your skyscrapers kind of indicate how developed and advanced you are. But really, that isn't the case. So I think countries that develop their urban infrastructure, etc., do so when they have come to a certain stage of development. So we came out of a 30-year war. And I think it was very necessary to rebuild that rural economy and rebuild the lives of citizens who had suffered during that war. And I don't think we got our priorities right in that. Reconstruction, some necessary reconstruction had to be done. Obviously, roads, train lines, all that had to be redone. But they became opportunities for corruption as well. So, I mean, unless we have transparent procurement systems and the transparent ways of showing how money is spent, we are doomed. And this can be done very easily in this day and age, through the web-based solutions, etc., if we have the mind to do it. So if we want to rebuild confidence in how we are using public resources, this is a way we can start that. The question is whether we have political will. If you have political will, lots of things will fall into place. So that is one. So I think it's a failure in investing in the human capital, a failure in really meaningfully addressing issues of reconciliation. If you want to heal this community and bring them together, you have to look at war crimes and accountability. That we have found very difficult to do. We only do it when we have to face the Human Rights Council. that's not the attitude to take. You have to take a different attitude towards reconciliation and community rebuilding. Then I also think, we have promised decentralization, provincial councils. People see that in political terms only, but really if they had meaningful provincial administration, it would have helped, because you know what the needs of the community are at the ground level. I'm not only talking about the Tamil community or the north and the east, I mean in the rest of Sri Lanka too. But because we have not respected provincial councils and what it can bring, we've used it as a dumping ground for people who have nowhere else to go, who are waiting to become parliamentarians, and we have not really developed local leadership. But if people really believed in it, I think that investment could take place. So I think the rebuilding provincial councils in a meaningful way would be very useful. Give them proper budgets and let them manage their affairs. So that is one very important thing. Transparency in how money is spent is very important, and I think the parties themselves really have to, if they want to have a survival in the future, they have to look at whom they recruit, the kinds of people whom they recruit, bringing in people who have some public service or skills, and that makes a big difference. So I mean, now it's a recruiting ground. It's like a hereditary, politics is a hereditary job. You get it from father to son, or mother to daughter, but there are other ways of bringing in people, and if they change the culture of politics, if there is a change in the culture of politics, people whom the community respects will come up. And there are a few such politicians who've come in from academia and other walks of life, and that's what people are yearning for, politicians whom they can respect, which they don't have now.
How important is it for the government to recognize that investing in education, healthcare, social services is what needs to be prioritized?
I think we also have to rethink our educational system, and I think it's not only for the government. One of the problems is that the educational policies change from government to government. We need to have a national plan for education and have a buy-in from all the major political stakeholders. So, I mean, we had the language policy where we had single only and we minimized English. Now, people regret that. Not only did it divide the communities, but it has created lost opportunities for young people who want to go abroad, or, who want access to information that is available, whether they like it or not. English is a world language. It's an opportunity for access to a lot more information, and people are dying for it. And they don't. They really do resent that they no longer have that opportunity. So to teach people not only language skills but the basic STEM skills that they need for the 21st century. It's a huge investment in public education, and that has to be geared to opportunities. So you need a national plan for education, and it cannot be this government or that government. They have to find a way of having a conversation around some core subjects, and I think whether you are a socialist or capitalist leaning party, there are some basics that they need to agree to. And since the parties don't have mechanisms where they can speak to each other with some respect, that has to be cultivated again. And that's why I think is the essence of meaningful parliamentary democracy, which we don't have now, because the executive presidency has centralized all power and decision making in the president. And the people who think that through their wisdom they will manage the country have really led us down the garden path, because we have not had a successful executive presidency that has really healed all these wounds and developed other institutions as well.
So on the one hand, the government's focus on mega development projects is associated with economic growth or economic recovery at this stage, and attracting foreign direct investment, which is again important. But on the other hand, can we speak about how the deprioritization of social requirements impact income inequality, poverty alleviation within Sri Lanka?
Yes, because I think since we are cutting back on education and this expenditure on education, we have a very skewed budget. No one wants to talk about how much of money goes into the military and how much money goes in servicing our debt. So with that, we have very little, for meaningful investment. So if you're going to make those changes, that has to come with, again, I think, much more political dialogue across the board to agree of a way of, downsizing some of this expenditure and developing it towards, new trainings and new opportunities for people. That is something that has to be done. It's very difficult at this time of crisis because we don't have the money. But if well-spent expenditure is better than ill-spent expenditure. But in spite of all this, in spite of the fact that we are in a crisis, you can see what the government's priorities are. There are some businesses that it simply will not let go of because it's politically unpalatable for them. But it's better to make those hard decisions that make decisions that, compromise on the welfare for ordinary citizens. And what is more, our people are not going to be capable of engaging in this new modern economy that the government is thinking of putting ahead. I mean, all the business and entities the investments come from overseas, and very soon they'll be wanting to bring in their own people to manage those businesses because on the grounds that the people are not competent or they are restive and they can't be controlled or they can't be managed, whatever, then you'll really ask yourself, what is development for?
Dr. Kadirgamar, we see a multiplicity of issues surrounding us. However, we need to look at it also from a lens of solution-orientedness. What do we do?
Well, we're now we're facing an election, right? And I think the political parties also should do some introspection, not simply look on, how are we going to extend our foothold in Parliament or with the executive presidency, but how can we reach out to other parties as well to come up with national solutions? We don't have a culture of positive coalitions in our country, and that is unfortunate because I think this really will need a coalition, a meaningful coalition. And we've had such bad records that people don't trust coalitions because they use it, so far they've used it by one party to disempower the other coalition partner. So I think if there is going to be a transitional government, it does need to be based on good faith, I think, and maybe an agreement before the elections, not just an election pact to win seats, but really on political agendas to agree on some fundamentals. I think the national question and managing the debt are two really important issues. So good luck if they are able to do that. That's what we want, but whether it'll happen, I don't know. The other is, I think, really our political parties need to really purge themselves of their deadwood, the people who are so have embarrassed their own parties, they've embarrassed the system. The other day I heard one of the parliamentarians, Mr. Sumandrian, pointing out in Parliament, he said when a motion of no confidence was brought against the Minister of Health, the government rallied round him to defeat it. But now the man is in remand. Now, I mean, this embarrasses the government. This is something they should have done politically. I mean, in other countries, in Britain, the Prime Minister faced an uprising in Parliament and he had to go, Boris Johnson. So, that kind of accountability has to happen within these political institutions. So I would really ask the political parties to, develop some backbone and some integrity in dealing with this. Because right now, people have lost respect for politicians. They've lost respect for key figures in government. And unless they face up to that, we are really going down the wrong path.
Dr. Sakuntala Kadirgamar, thank you very much for coming in and sharing your perspectives.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again tomorrow. Good night.